When you hear Full Metal Alchemist, what do you think? Brotherhood? Maybe Nina? The ending in the 2003 adaptation that made no sense apparently? Or do you think about the two movies? Wait, seriously? Conqueror of Shamballa. Where do I even start with this one? Anyone who knows my channel knows that I happen to be a big fan of FMA 2003. However, that doesn't mean that I'll blindly say that anything attached to that name is good. Best example? This movie. Conqueror of Shamballa is full of corny writing, sometimes bad writing, a terrible villain, and overall nothing that captures the spirit of 2003, or Full Metal Alchemist as a whole. If you're a fan of FMA 2003 and somehow you didn't see this movie, please don't watch it. It honestly doesn't add much to the story. However, for those curious few, there will be spoilers for the movie that sadly concludes FMA 2003. Now let me give a brief summary of this movie. Ed is trapped in a world that parallels Amestris, the world he comes from. He meets a few new faces and tries to make it back to Amestris in order to reunite with his friends. However, once he finally makes it back, he makes the ultimate sacrifice in order to keep everyone close to him safe and returns to the parallel world. Now how long did it take this movie to do that? Almost 2 hours? And those 2 hours are guaranteed to be the most boring 2 hours of your life if you actually sit down and watch this movie. No, I'm not going to pretend that this movie is absolutely irredeemable. It starts off pretty well with a decently fun action sequence and interesting premise that had a lot of potential. There are pretty touching scenes and some neat ideas that should have been expanded on. And the animation as well towards the end was pretty great. However, these moments are very few in number, and it's a total slugfest to get through. I spent so long pondering about this movie, but all I could think of is, wow, nothing fucking happened, huh? So much of the film is dedicated to showing this parallel world, but they never do anything with this idea. For example, it's implied that Ed has been here for a while, so how does he feel? Is he close to giving up on his goal? He should at least be a little sad about his lack of progress. How would he feel about Al? He's no longer his brother, right? Are there ever any moments where Ed forgets that and tries to talk to him normally? There are so many ideas for character interactions that were practically gift-wrapped to the studio and they were not used. One thing that I instantly thought of after finishing this movie is, Al is not Ed's brother in this world. Does that mean that Trisha isn't Edward's mother? And if that's true, does that mean there's a chance that she could be alive here? And if that's true, then why isn't there an interaction between the two? Maybe while Ed is feeling down about his whole situation, Trisha could come in and give a really heartwarming speech to help him on his feet again, and it would be interesting to see how Ed reacts to that. It's the perfect scenario to easily create an emotionally potent scene that would effortlessly raise the stakes of the movie. And this movie doesn't do that. We did get some familiar faces in the form of Maze Hughes, Rose or Noah, and King Bradley. Evil Hughes is an interesting idea. It's a concept that can really push the ideals of our hero, seeing someone he knows to be really compassionate and caring, acting really shitty and selfish. But Ed and Hughes don't interact at all. Ed never goes into detail about his feelings about that, and while the former lieutenant colonel does have a redemption towards the end, it doesn't feel earned or satisfactory because the movie didn't show much of that. I feel like Noah was fine for the most part, but I also think they spent too much time on her portion of the story, time that could have went to exploring this dynamic between Ed and Hughes. What do I even say about Bradley? He was just a glorified cameo, but not as bad as this major offense though. They really thought it was better to introduce two characters that really don't add much to the plot than to go into how Nina, Tucker, Izumi, Winry, Mustang, Hawkeye, Maria Ross, Lust as a human, hell, how any of the homunculi would act in this parallel world. It also doesn't help that the movie thinks you're watching this to study for a test the whole time. It crams as many historical allusions and bland exposition scenes as possible into the script, attempting to pass it off as actual dialogue.
And what are we now? The only thing the Treaty of Versailles did was humiliate us.
The Berlin government is spineless. They have no intention of protecting Germany at all.
Rumor has it he's too busy with the Thule Society now.
Thule Society?
Yeah, you haven't heard of it?
Thule's a mystical island in the north that was written about in ancient mythology.
The Thule Society wants to harness the power of the gods who dwell on the island and reclaim the destiny of the Aryan race. Dr. Mabusa the Gambler, I understand that's a film you made.
Just having a little fun with you. Call me Fritz Lang if you prefer. I'm toying with the idea of leaving this country and moving to America for a while.
That spineless regime in Berlin will be overthrown, and the Fuhrer will lead this nation to greatness. Every man in here is a member of the same group fighting for a stronger country, the National Socialist Workers' Party.
Nazis?
Yeah, that's how people actually talk in real life. They constantly make references to events on a timeline that honestly don't really affect them that much. Now that I think about it, wouldn't that be really annoying if it were actually the case? I mean, just imagine you're in a public restaurant enjoying your meal and some asshole in the back just says, "Hey, you hear about the XYZ affairs? That shit's crazy." And the thing is, you don't need this, like, at all. It's not necessary for anybody to understand the plot of the movie. So fortunately, there's an easy solution to this. Just don't fucking do it. I mean, how much time is dedicated to this in total? Maybe like 5 minutes? You could do something with that time, which is better than nothing. This leads me to the writing. Oh god, what happened? Is this really the best they could do? The dialogue comes off as very forced and anime at times. Scenes happen without much connection to each other. I remember one scene specifically where Ed is trying to sneak into an enemy base or something, and then he turns and there's just a broken window behind him. First of all, that's already a really lazy way to get a protagonist into a certain situation. Now, I think the explanation for why this window is broken is that this woman broke it to lead Ed inside, but why did she specifically break this window on this side of the building? How did she know that Ed would come here? If Ed was trying to get in anyway, then why didn't Ed just break the window himself? And then there's the terrible stretching of the definition of alchemy, and this is coming from a guy who actively defends the 2003 series, where, if anyone knows 2003, alchemy isn't really defined in that show either. Like, you can tell there's a basic structure to the process, but the show does kind of put its own spin on the science. But oh boy, Conqueror of Shamballa really ups this to the nth degree. At this point, it's not even a parody of a science. It's just straight up magic. Alphonse learns how to place part of his soul in armor to make them fight for him. Which, how? How do you just split up a part of your soul and place them into inanimate objects? How much limitation does this power have? Does your soul have a finite source that you can pull out of? In fact, isn't this kind of a form of human transmutation, which is forbidden alchemy, that both you and your brother vowed to never use again? Doesn't using this kind of undermine the whole idea behind your character? Even looking past that morally conflicting decision, how does cutting up your soul affect you? If you run out of souls to give to armors, is it possible for you to get it back? And if not, does that make you a homunculus? And how would that work? Because you have no soul, but you weren't created like the others, so would you be different in some way? Now, I'm asking all these questions purely out of confusion and a bit of spite, but isn't it terrifying that I spent a few seconds just asking a bunch of questions and I've already come up with a better and more interesting concept for this movie? It's also kind of weird that Ed opens the gate on his side through the use of alchemy when alchemy isn't a thing in this world. Now, they do give a pseudo explanation of why this is able to work, but just like the rest of this movie, it doesn't go anywhere. And after they open the gate, they make it to a mistress. Okay, that wasn't that long. We're only like an hour and 20 minutes in? We're almost done with the movie and we just now see the villains as well as Ed make it to Amestris? To people who have never seen the movie, you might be wondering how that's the case, since the things that I brought up in this video couldn't have possibly taken an hour and 20 minutes to get through. Well, I forgot to mention a subplot about Ed and Noah running away from authorities that doesn't go anywhere, another subplot about racism towards gypsies, Envy getting captured by the Thule Society, 3 different scenes of the villains trying and failing to get through the gate, an exposition scene that explains concepts of the show that we already knew about, and literal Nazis. Oh wait, I didn't forget to mention that. I didn't want to mention that because it isn't needed. You don't need to cram all of these different ideas together. Maybe some of them, but definitely not all or even most of them. When making a movie to conclude your series, you need to separate the absolute necessities from just the cool ideas that you have. But yeah, this really dragged on for a bit. Because of how late the characters make it to Amestris in the film, the villain's motivations for being the bad person are awful. She says that she at first wanted to come to the this world so that she could see the alchemy and its tremendous power for herself, but when she got there, she was terrified by the immense destructive capability it had, and thought the only way to deal with it was to stomp it into the ground. And I could believe that if she spent more than like 5 minutes in this world. Like, geez, dude, you just got here and you already think it's terrible and it has to be destroyed? Just a second ago, you were exploding with euphoria at the fact that you actually made it here and got past the gate, and all of a sudden it's terrifying? You know how the movie could have easily fixed this if we were able to get to Amestris after 30 minutes of the film. That way, we would be able to see the villain's perspective change and it would feel more natural, and having most of the movie take place in Amestris would obviously give you more creative freedom when directing action scenes, because alchemy is a thing here. The fight between Wrath and Gluttony was freaking beautiful, and I know that you could have done so much more if you had just taken the time to. The parallel world idea is neat, but it can only really be used to show the audience character interactions that wouldn't have taken place in the setting we're familiar with. So you could spend the first 30 minutes getting all of these interactions out of the way to properly build up the action climax that happens after. And then we get to the ending of this movie. Oh boy, did I not like it. I want to make it clear that it's not the fact that Ed goes back to the other world that makes me hate this movie. I can appreciate the sentiment that the scene was going for, but the way it was done just really annoyed me, because Ed just got back home near the end of the movie, and right after he does his thing, he leaves. So this isn't Ed committing to a very selfless act that he does to protect the people he loves and the people who always supported him. This is the main character literally saying,
That's right. After all that trouble, I'm still here. Surprise?
yep, all of this was for nothing. You sat through this nearly 2-hour movie with the hope that Ed would finally make it back to his friends and live happily? Not my fucking problem, kid. How does it feel? How does it feel that I took 2 hours of your life away from you for no reason? Talk about a huge slap in the face. If Ed spent more time in Amestris, then the build-up would be a lot stronger. It would make the finale feel a lot more justified. It would honestly feel really sad and touching, and it wouldn't be forced or shoehorned in there for the sake of making a bittersweet ending. And it would also have a point, like there was an actual reason for you to watch this fucking movie. But this is FMA, and there is at least one message that it sends the viewers off with.
I want to be at your side, brother, no matter what. I want to see the same things, and learn what you learn, and keep on journeying together. Like those years we were looking for the stone. Despite all the hardships, those were the best times we had.
No, it wasn't. That was an arduous journey filled with bloodshed, horror, trauma, sin, terrifying monsters, serial killers, betrayal, and almost the end of the world. But seriously, I do want to end this video on a more positive note, so what I liked about this movie is how they used Wrath. He was the real hero, and while his role was small, it left a pretty big impact on me, and his resolution at the end is touching and satisfying. But other than that, this movie sucks. And that was the tragedy of Conqueror of Shamballa. Overall, not the worst thing ever, but incredibly boring and stale. The whole time I was watching, I was coming up with ideas that could have been explored, but weren't because movies got a movie, I guess. Anyways, those are my thoughts on the film, and for anyone who watched the whole thing, thanks, and goodbye for now.